Hopefully it won't cut out this time.
Indeed. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming back. I'm not sure where we left off. Um,
It was very deep philosophical stuff where we left off last time.
yeah, I guess you. So I have another idea for you. I think the people that will have the skills and sort of um, the relationships with each other to be able to colonize the rest of the solar system probably won't be coming from our cities or from our normal society. And I was wondering if you what you thought about that.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I mean, cities are going to be where they're going to start at least, but I mean, I can kind of see if you're trying to infer that they're going to be more practical, being out in the ocean, researching oceans, or out in the deserts to research the deserts. I mean, that kind of makes sense. But just a mere matter of infrastructure. They're going to have to be in a city eventually.
Right, but I guess what I mean is, I got to imagine that being uh, in a colony on the moon or in free space or in Mars, you'll be always very close to the edge of just what you need to survive. It'd be like the most extraneous type of camping that you could imagine. And I don't think people who live in cities in comfort and plenty will have the mindset for that type of life.
Yeah, and that does make sense. Yeah. And you can do both. I mean, you can be city survivalist, but plus another factor you haven't mentioned is that there's also the difficulty of trying to survive on your own. Isolation. Even if there's a group of others, it can be a little bit difficult because you're always encountering the same people. It's never you get nothing new. It's always the same cycle of people, often doing the same jobs. I mean, I would say it's more akin to like living at the South Pole, where they're completely cut off for months at a time, and they're completely self-dependent on themselves. Everything they need they have to do right there because there can't be resupply, there can't be anything for months.
Oh, exactly. In fact, I think before we send like a group of 100 people to Mars and they potentially go crazy or fall apart, we should take that 100 people and put them on the South Pole and see if they can survive for a couple of years.
Well, I do know that's kind of what NASA's doing. They have small, Martian camps, where they just put them in spacesuits and they force them to live in a habitation um, area, and always going out with spacesuits, kind of replicating those experiences on Earth. But of course, I mean, it's kind of difficult to perfectly replicate those situations because, with those simulations, if something goes wrong, you immediately tear off the suit and you can be rushed to a hospital. But on Mars, that isn't an option. So even mentally, we're not quite on the same level.
Yeah. And, I think that's also another reason the moon makes a good intermediate step before going to Mars, because you also won't be able to immediately get back to society in like a few hours. It'll take you maybe 3 or 4 days to get back to society.
Exactly. So anything that happens, and you always have to resolve it then because you won't have a second opportunity. As we saw with Apollo 13, it took majority of NASA and even international partners to help us just get them back home after relatively, considering all the possibilities, a relatively small incident.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the contribution of our international partners for Apollo 13. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
It's kind of hard to say specifically, but I do know that such as coding and programming was kind of outsourced. Although IBM was largely American, there were still there would be overseas connections. Maybe I know the British have a lot of work with also programming, so it's kind of hard to say that there wouldn't be, and I can't say confidently that it's 100% an American recovery because again with so many assets and so many skills spread across so many parts of the world, even back then it all would have taken a phone call and maybe they could have do X, Y, and Z for a program. Even though, and again, parts of most of Apollo was American, but resource production, because I do know, especially went through and they tried to track down all the parts, the metals, the alloys, the bolts, trying to figure out what caused the explosion in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I know last time we talked a lot about SpaceX. We hardly talked at all about Blue Origin. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on them.
They're definitely the SpaceX that they're the polar opposite. They do everything slowly, but everything they're doing is they're doing it right. They're not trying by trial and error because right now New Glenn is in production, but you don't see any testing, but you know that their vehicle's already up to spec and it's already meeting all the requirements they're setting forth for themselves. And we already know how successful they're working because their engineers all they actually did the first soft powered landing before SpaceX, and they also their engineers came directly from the DCX program, which soft landed the first rocket ever. So their engineers have already proven themselves to be more than capable, having a legacy of developing that technology. And again, we don't see anything and there's a lot of silence on their end, but we also know that there is a lot of they're still hard at work because every couple of months they're still unveiling some new project. I mean, they dropped the news of the fairing and it was completely blindsided. I didn't even know they were that far along with production when they announced it.
Yeah, and you mentioned you had a reusable designs for a reusable space capsule, but like the cost of doing that would be so prohibitive that you really felt like you couldn't make progress on it. And that's one of the things that Jeff Bezos talks about in terms of his ambition is to basically create that infrastructure that allows for like a couple of kids in a college dorm to put together an idea for a space business and actually be able to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you had heard that before and if you see that actually coming to fruition.
I've heard that. I've heard that rumor. I haven't ever confirmed it, but I mean, it sounds justified because that's exactly what New Glenn is doing, and they are very much bringing space much closer than before by providing the cheapest suborbital flights I currently know about. But I also know that the suborbital market for especially the micro satellite launcher market is about to become very saturated as more and more launches are becoming more and more launchers are being able to be developed at a cheaper cost. And as access grows, there will be more options than there are a need for them. But it is very much becoming a turn. A lot of things are changing with that aspect of the industry because it is becoming something that anyone can fly on. And if he can bring orbit or the moon closer, any step forward is going to be a huge leap because that's going to be the major steps that'll change space from being just that nearly science fiction thought that people see today as opposed to being right next door, just being one giant leap right next door.
Right. And what do you think the holdup is with like New Shepard? I mean, it seems like the craft's been tested so many times. It looks like it should be like operational and they should be like launching people, but yet it seems stalled.
It does, and it definitely seems curious, and that definitely comes back to how they're very private. They don't announce much. Possibly, maybe they don't have enough customers. It's hard to say, but maybe it's also possible their resources and time are actually being dedicated to New Glenn rather than New Shepard. But you're absolutely right. There is an absolute. It's completely done as far as we're aware of. Of course, there could be additional testing we don't know about. Um, so it's hard to say with how little information we have. But from what we can tell, it's probably just that they're focusing to New Glenn because while New Shepard has seemed to disappear into the background, New Glenn is definitely taking larger and larger strides.
And what do you think about Blue Moon?
Blue Moon was another surprise, especially out of Blue Origin. I know they're a very, very capable company with, like I said, a great legacy, but I thought they would have been sticking to the launch vehicle market. But it seems like a very, very sorry, it seems like a very good vehicle, and it seems like it'll obviously work. It's just a matter, can they, build it? How quickly can they? They definitely have the jump start with the Artemis program because they were the first to unveil theirs. And but we'll still have to see if it can actually work. It has to go through all this testing. But out of the comparison of the three, the national team, their vehicle, and SpaceX, theirs is probably, I'm going to say theirs is going to be one of the more likely ones because it requires less um, less testing, and the more the tests are sorry, the components are more, trying to phrase this properly, they've already been tested and they're more based on legacy. They've already proven themselves through their way they've been designed. They're very legacy focused and not using new hardware and new experimental technologies like SpaceX is.
Well, and we've talked a lot about rockets, but there's been other ways to get to orbit that's been talked about quite a bit. And it looks like reaction engines and their Sabre air-breathing engine looks to be making progress. And I was wondering if you've been keeping up with that.
Oh, that has definitely been one of my favorite aspects to be watching out for, because I definitely think that once, as I see it, current modern rockets will become entirely obsolete once SSTOs not only exist but become commonplace. The more SSTOs, the more competition. With competition, you will start to narrow it down. And it's just, especially with Skylon, you can take it off and launch it from a runway. You can pull it into a hangar in less than, assume it only takes 30 minutes to wheel it into a hangar and inspect it, as opposed to even with Starship landing back at its launch pad. You have to inspect tiles, you have to go around it, you have to replug it in, you have to go through so many more steps. With Skylon, you just check the tiles, check the engines, refuel it, and resend it off. You can have it fly multiple times a day. And that's not even a difficult concept. With Starship, launching it multiple times a day, it has to land. It has to, there's so many more factors. But with Skylon, with Starship, it has to remain in orbit. If the weather or there's too much winds, any problem with the landing site, it can't land. But with Skylon, if the landing site is not good, it can go to another one. It can fly to any other one, just like the shuttle and the Buran were planned to.
Well, I guess if if SpaceX is actually successful in building a number of offshore landing platforms, if they got enough, wouldn't that go a long ways to kind of mitigating that issue?
It could, but it's still, they've only ever landed at their primary launch site. They've never had the option of a backup in case, if a Falcon 9 can't land, they've never had the option of, let's go to landing site 1 or 2. It's always been, you have one target. So it's yet to be proven if it can actually alter and correct its course. Now, granted, Falcon 9 has never stayed in orbit. It's always just come right back down. It's never stayed up there for long. Starship is planning to be in orbit, so they could give it some option, but again, at least with the space shuttle, it had enough wings that it could generate enough lift to carry itself, even if just for a short duration. So, plus it could also utilize other existing runways. Runways in Spain and Australia and Africa, they had runways, just standard runways they could use. You don't have that option with Starship. It has to be a very specifically designed facility.
And so we talked about reaction engines, but what do you think about like spin launch? I mean, that's a completely different concept.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to say. If they can say launch it from an altitude, that might work. Otherwise, you end up with the same issues as like a railgun with ram heating, and you just end up melting the payload before it gets anywhere. But if they can find some way of circumventing that and getting around the ram heating, then it would definitely be a rather huge leap forward, albeit I see it as a similar issue to a space elevator where the investment is going to be too great for the payoff, but we'll have to see. That's, I definitely see that as very far future.
And then, even farther future, what do you think about like sky hooks and tethers and that type of idea?
All right, 1 second. I got somebody on the call.
Okay.
Yeah. 1 second.
I completely understand. That's, but let's see. So we talked about reactions. Oh, skyhooks. Yeah.
Yes, skyhooks. Yes. About them. I'm not too familiar. Close. I see them kind of in the same branch as space elevators, but I mean they have some potential, but again, it relies on technology and material sciences that haven't really developed, kind of carbon nanotube style. more, you need more strength and material than we currently know even could possibly exist.
Indeed. See, what else? I had a good question, but it slipped my mind.
I hate that when it happens.
Yeah, me too. Okay, what do you think about space-based solar power?
That's definitely interesting. If we can, like, even if we develop like a small ISS size solar farm and could like transmit it via microwave, that would be a huge benefit because it's 100% clean 100% clean energy. I mean, no need for nuclear or anything else. It's just a matter of making sure we can get it safely and, developing the microwave technology. I mean, I've heard there's already been work with some um, civilian technologies, like I believe it's with Samsung smartphones, would uses the microwave type of connections, microwave energy transmission when you set it down on a charging plate. I believe that's the same thing. I'm not too certain though.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, getting the power down is a big problem. One other thought I had was maybe use the power in place. So big consumer uh, power is, and what about actually, having your data center in orbit and then use the solar farm to power that?
Yeah, using it to power other spacecraft like that, that's definitely a huge benefit because we can use it to create, say, plasma engines and engines that otherwise just aren't possible with onboard energy reserves, because, batteries are too heavy and any alternative just doesn't generate enough. So it would definitely hugely change the playing field for how we develop spacecraft, period. Everything would change.
And talking about kind of other countries, China, do you see them as kind of being a healthy competition, a threat, eventual partner? Like where do they kind of fit in your view of the future?
I would say a potential partner. They develop new technologies, but they don't seem to prove that it's that capable yet. Right now, they've launched a new larger scale capsule that's supposed to be for the moon, supposedly, but I don't know if it's even left low Earth orbit. So there's so many question marks about their program that I can't comfortably say that, we don't even know if they have a lander. They've only landed on the moon twice with rovers. So it's kind of hard to say that they're ever going to be competition. I would hope one day. I'm in the middle. I understand why America is so hesitant to cooperate with them, understanding our past. But I do hope that one day a sort of Apollo Soyuz can be done, but with China. Even if it's like modified Orion, so just something so we can finally bring it together. Because the less bridges there are in space, the more we join together, the better we will be. As we already can see that with the International Space Station. That's only a few dozen nations, and each of those are, each one of them have contributed so much. Like imagine the International Space Station without the help of Canada and their Canada arm. Did you drop out? Yes, you did.
Resume. Okay, cool. Wow, that's
There we go.
pretty amazing. Overheating iPhones and lots of other things, but definitely a very interesting recording.
Definitely.
Uh, let's see. So we were talking about China. You were saying that it doesn't look like they have as much capability as that they might need, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really difficult to see how. I mean, they're sort of like maybe more like Blue Origin in the sense that they're making progress and.
Yeah, slow progress. And like I said, I don't know if you caught it, but what I said is I would hope one day we can develop a Apollo Soyuz, but with China, the less bridges they are, the less gaps in those bridges, the better we can do. And as we can already see with the International Space Station, which is only a few, less than a dozen nations, I believe, that have actually built modules, but imagine it without Canada, and their Canada arm has made it so much more possible, even before International Space Station with the space shuttle. It's just entirely change the playing field or how we operate in space once we started to collaborate.
Yeah. And then Russia, they've been pretty much stuck with the Soyuz for just little minor improvements here and there.
Yeah, I feel like what's happening to them is and I don't like to get into politics, but I think their economy is not doing so well. It's kind of crashing themselves, and they want to be part of the space market, but with reducing budget, falling behind. They're not being able to meet up to what they can do anymore, and they're pretty much limited to the Soyuz. And I have a sneaking suspicion that even that'll go and maybe just become progress only in the next coming years as SpaceX and Boeing completely overtake the astronaut launching aspect.
Yeah, that would be quite the day, the last Soyuz launch.
It'll be a sad day, but hopefully things will change and they can get serious. And I'm hoping that what they can do is they can find a new option, and maybe they will go to progress to the International Space Station, but maybe make something new for the for Lobji.
And the only other country that I know of that's trying to launch people is India.
Yes,
yeah.
And they're very new at it right now. So it'll be interesting to see. I also have heard some whisper, I cannot confirm, but I've heard some whisper that like commercial people are starting in Britain and the UK trying to, but again, I don't have anything to substantiate that. It's possible just one more rumored startup that always pops up here and there.
Yeah, a lot of PowerPoint and website and visions, but no hardware.
That's the thing about. I understand that.
That's the thing about the Mars One project that kind of confused me. I mean, here is a company that has marketing and graphics people, but no HR, no astronaut training, no anything.
Yeah, you've got a great pitch, but you don't have anything to put behind that pitch. Yeah, and that's been a lot of problem with a lot of space companies, is that it's cheaper to sell an idea than it is to build on that idea, and it's why it sadly always falls to the big wealthy people, because especially with like SpaceX, the idea of making a financially viable reusable booster was a huge requirement, and it's why we don't see many companies attempting it other than Blue Origin and SpaceX, because the financial investment, the paywall behind that is so staggeringly high that only the extremely wealthy can afford to develop on that. Now, if you remove that paywall and make it expendable, you get companies like Electron, who are developing it for really cheap. It's small, but it's still very much cheap and a lot more accessible. And even he's starting to work on trying to make it recoverable via air parachute catching.
Yeah, and with the Vulcan, ULA is talking about kind of a smart reuse option where they have the parachuting of the first stage rockets. And, considering that the SLS has 4 rocket engines that I think are valued about $100 million each.
Yeah, roughly. That was at least the contracted price. Yeah. And it's possible we could see them do that. We haven't heard any whisper. It's possible. The biggest thing with it right now is that the RS-25s have been so heavily overhauled to remove those reusable components. Granted, every shuttle launch still required a complete refurb. The engines were completely removed, so it doesn't really make much of a difference anyway. So could they? It's possible, but that would definitely be several years down the line. And right now, NASA's focus is undoubtedly just trying to get it to launch and trying to support Artemis with landers, trying to make sure everything for Artemis is in a line. But after that, it's very possible we could see them trying to, try to make it a little bit cheaper, because SMART is by far the least intensive way to redesign the vehicle for reuse, as opposed to trying to land it SpaceX style, because the changes for that would be so substantial. It would be a new rocket. It would require new certification, new testing. And not only that, but the impact on payload would be incredible. You wouldn't be able to launch Orion to the moon anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like even if you couldn't get all 4 engines, if you just get one, that would be a huge improvement. Well, anything else that comes to your mind?
Um, Probably just the biggest thing. I mean, the only other thing I don't think we've mentioned is just maybe speaking about ULA, since we've already spoken about SpaceX and Blue Origin, since they're the only other major player right now that is trying to change the market. You've already mentioned Vulcan, but there's also talk of like them launching Sierra Nevada, which is going to be a huge game changer, considering it'll be the gliding, first commercial gliding vehicle that isn't military, because the only other thing that flies back to its launch site is the X-37B. So that'll definitely be interesting, especially with its heritage in the human landing system, or human launching system. I can't remember, HLS. Anyway, but with its heritage in that, it's very possible that in a couple of years we could see it launching too with crew, and that would be pretty interesting, considering it'll be the first time we would see a crew launching on top of a rocket. With the space shuttle, it was beside them, so it'll definitely be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, they have the potential of going through the same sort of development and testing pattern as SpaceX did with the Dragon and then the Crew Dragon. I mean, you can look at it. It looks like it was meant to carry people. It's
Yeah,
carrying cargo.
exactly. I keep looking at that's the big thing with Sierra Nevada right now, is it seems like every 2 or 3 times a week they're coming out with new development progress. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You look at the shape, you look at the design, it is quite clearly designed to carry people, but sadly it won't, at least for a little while. But any progress right now is a huge step forward, especially since it's going a spaceplane type vehicle is going to be one of the only ones that are going to be able to best suit, say, repair missions, because that's what made the space shuttle so successful with things like Hubble, because no other vehicle we've ever designed was as versatile as the space shuttle. Not Apollo, not Gemini, not Soyuz. There's just no other vehicle as versatile. Space shuttle was space station by itself. It visited space stations. It did repairs. It collected satellites. It deployed satellites, scientific experiments. It did so many different things, and Sierra Nevada can have that option to them as well. And maybe they could be the company to finally reboost or repair Hubble space, the space telescope, and get it back to a safe altitude so it won't deorbit. But we'll have to see.
Well, I mean, definitely in terms of an emergency with the crew, being able to get into the winged vehicle, land on any airport runway in a major city and
Yes.
immediately get to medical personnel would
And
be a great
that could
option.
very well possibly replace. Um, right now, it's Soyuz. I expect Soyuz to be replaced by Dragon 2 or the Starliner as the emergency escape craft, but it's very possible that Dream Chaser could replace that as well because of its absolute massive range. Because even with Dragon 2, you have to land in the sea, and there's only select landing sites. You can't just pick any spot in the ocean. And Starliner, I believe it is rated to land in the ocean, but it's mostly designed to land on land, which is relatively a small area on Earth to land in the Central America, Central U.S. So Dream Chaser would by far have the most option and the most wide-ranging options for where it can abort and where it can land.
Right. I mean, both Starliner and Dragon, you would need recovery teams to go out and fetch the vehicles and get the astronauts. But with Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser, I mean, they land at the airport and you have people there.
Exactly. There's already facilities.
And, I mean, you got many cities you go to. So, it could be a really, really good option. In fact, I think originally, whenever they were building this space station, they kind of had envisioned a vehicle like Dream Chaser as being a rescue vehicle, but it got canceled, I believe.
I think I've heard that it was actually going to deliver cargo to specific airports, and that it would be ferried back. So you could, if you wanted to deliver something in, the UK, it would land at a UK airport and be shipped back by, a standard airliner. Of course, I don't know if it can fit. It might need a 747 just to store it, but I think that was the idea, was that it was going to land at its destination to quickly deliver your payload, as opposed to waiting for it to be packaged and then shipped overseas from America.
Oh, I know something we hadn't talked about, private space stations. Bigelow Aerospace. In fact, I
Yes.
got my Think Outside the Can cup right here.
Nice.
But they furloughed all their people and they've been radio silent. What's up?
Yeah, that well, with things going on right now, that's not an absolute surprise, but hopefully they can hold together. It's just a matter of keeping things in, trying to prevent things from tipping too far over that it's lost. But if they can, and even if they do fall, I do expect that somebody else will propose a similar idea and just fill that void anyway, because it's pretty straightforward. The International Space Station, as loved as it is, it's very much reaching the end of its lifetime. Its core components are starting to either becoming too antiquated, or you having to replace such core components that you would have to shut down massive aspects of the station to replace it. So a new station is by far needed. Now, the only thing we can hope is that it's saved, and I do propose, it's a personal idea, but um, the only vehicle I can imagine that could actually save the International Space Station or return it to the Earth for, say, museums, which would be the first time an active crewed space station has been recovered, would be using Starship. Because of its massive cargo area, you would pack each module, land it, and then you would recover it. And that would allow you to keep the station without letting it burn up like they're intending, which would especially be concerning with its size. Even if they broke it up into chunks, there's still some of those modules will break into chunks. They will they will impact wherever they land.
And if Taco Bell does their thing like they did for Mirror, we might have a better chance of free tacos.
Yeah.
Um, that let's see. One of the issues with the Dragon capsule that came up was they didn't know how long the mission could be because they weren't sure about how long the solar panels would actually be operational for, that there would be some degradation there. But the solar panels that are the primary solar panels for International Space Station has been up there for, what, 2 decades at this point?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between those solar panels?
Well, I think one is, I mean, they're of similar design or similar composition as far as the internal design. I think the biggest thing is those solar panels are designed to constantly be at work, but whereas the SpaceX solar panel is constantly having to account for its rotation, it's undergoing forces, it's being moved, and it's expendable. It's not designed to last more than a couple of months. With the space station solar panels, which are in bad shape, they're in need of repair. So it's just a matter of which one is designed to last longer. In my opinion, I would have to look more into that, but that's where I would say it's just a matter of design. One's designed to be disposed of, while the other is meant to stay around for as long as possible. When you're trying to drain every second, every operational hour out of those solar panels.
And Axiom Aerospace, they seem to be on the path of actually creating a module for the ISS, and that being the core of a private space station.
Mm-hmm.
Have any insight into that?
Not too familiar. But if they do start to replace it, if they can replace the core, then anything's possible. Because most of the other outer modules, post 2005 ish, they're in great condition. They're built with more modern technologies. Because prior to 2005, it was a lot more analog. Digital was still the primary aspect, but you still have like analog switches, very more Apollo style wiring and electronic systems, as opposed to the newer solid state equipment that are able to do things with less moving parts and higher reliability and higher lifespans. So if they can do that, anything's possible. And I do remember reading, I don't know if I still have the article, I would have to dig, but I do remember reading an article in the early 2010s, like 2013, 2014, which proposed the idea of replacing the ISS with a space station that would constantly, each new component would be the core, so to say. So you could keep, like, it would have a 2-year lifespan. Once you reach the end of it, you release it, it burns up. You just keep stacking and you keep adding on, kind of with the Progress or Dragon 2 resupplies, but instead of them just being resupplies, they're whole modules, and you just keep moving it along, keep stacking it up. And if you can get more on there, you build it up larger, but each one has a lifespan and it's actually disposable, so that we don't have this problem of relying on what becomes antiquated or very, very ancient technology and having to compensate whenever you add or replace something.
That's a neat concept. And Tom Cruise filming a movie in space.
Yeah, everyone I've told that to has just rolled their eyes. But of all people, I don't think he's a good choice. But of all people, it's not surprising it's Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is usually the guy to try to do that. And it's not a surprise. NASA's obviously been trying to commercialize the International Space Station as much as possible. I mean, they're try to get it, remove as much responsibility as possible, trying to push it to commercial. So this is not entirely a surprise, but again, I would definitely say there are better options.
I'm
But
just trying to imagine, other than the novelty of having a film shot into space, shot in orbit, I mean, I can't imagine the cinematography experience would be better. I almost feel like it'd be worse. Like it
yeah,
just be
because
like,
you can't get film equipment up there. And personally, I think it's you're very much hitting an issue versus this movie versus Apollo 13. Apollo 13 was shot in a vomit comet, and it very much looks real. It very much reaches you would think it was in space the whole time, even though it was filmed at 20, 30,000 feet doing drops. It works, but I guess it's just for the prestige of being able to say it's the first filmed up there. But I don't. Yeah, I definitely agree. You don't have a lighting studio. You don't have a director. A director's got a 2 second ish delay with the lag trying to compensate with the space station. So I don't think it's going to work too well. But at least we're showing it's possible for future generations as they develop their own films up there.
yeah, and you don't have extras either.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I guess the extras will be whoever's on board.
I mean, it's almost like Tom Cruise will have to be both sides of whatever, the villain and the thing. That I mean that
Yeah.
they're I think we're hitting on the plot here. Twin brothers, one good, one bad, out for it.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if they can make it work, and we've already had set of twins in space, so it wouldn't be the first time, but
Well,
we'll
I
have to
mean,
see.
it'd just be Tom Cruise being both places because they couldn't afford to put another guy up there.
Or maybe he literally is both at the same time, because there was that one movie, I can't remember the actor, it was called Moon, and it had like three people in the entire film. And it was just one guy for like in it 45 minutes.
Oh, I
And it was
know.
actually pretty good. Yeah.
It yeah. It is drawn out though. I will say that.
It is drawn out, but it isn't the worst. Another movie that had high hopes was, what was it called? It was it also took place on the moon, but it was supposed to be really Ad Astra. I think it was Ad Astra that had high hopes, but did not. Yeah, I feel like it was trying to be like 2001 ish, or actually probably closer to Interstellar. It was trying to be meta, but didn't really work out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I really appreciate your time, Mike, and I look forward to reading all your tweets. And
I'm so glad that I finally found a place for me to actually share my thoughts, because I've been bouncing around from community to community, Skype, Discord, and the KSP forums, and I personally feel that all of those environments have been helping to mature my thought and be able to what should I say, how should I say it, especially the forums. They're very strict, but because they force you to behave and explain your idea in a very mature way, especially if you want to be able to reply, actually provide good content for somebody else to reply to. And now Twitter, it's a limitation on the size, but it forces you to make a very concise point very quickly and very short. And that definitely changes how you think, because with videos, it's very likely that you're going to rant. You're just going to be, say a lot of things. But in Twitter posts, you say it in 240 characters. You can't go over. And that definitely forces how you change. And I'm so glad that there are people that enjoy my posts. I try to change it up, try to add some things in there. Not only, airspace fun facts, that way everyone has something to enjoy. But I really am. And the community I found on there, I never would have expected to find such amazing people, such people like David Willis. He is an absolute inspiration, because he's creating amazing renders all the time. And he's also trying to properly combat bias that there is out there. I mentioned at the beginning, he's trying to explain to people, no, this is how it really is. And that's a huge, especially with so much more interest coming up in the next few years with this next decade, just any truth we can get out of the matter, so people can honestly understand vehicles like SLS. Yes, expensive, but it's a matter of how you see it. The government spending on SLS is like 0.05%. It's tiny. But because people say, oh, it's $20 billion, it's a matter of how you're seeing it, and it's putting all that into proper perspective and having somebody tell you, because a lot of journalists today, they only want to tell you that it's expensive. They don't want to tell you how that expense is actually handled, how expensive it really is in the grand scope of other projects like Apollo or the space shuttle. It doesn't, when you give one context, it isn't a full answer.
Yeah, that's true. I was also thinking about Phil Metzger. He has been really good in terms of having really long Twitter posts, like 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10, 4 of 10. But they're pretty, very extremely informative, I think.
Yeah, I understand you. Sometimes you have the long thought, but I also find it a little bit more difficult to manage because you can't, when you have somebody replying either to one part or replying to the whole chain, it's a lot harder to manage. But if it works for you, that's what's important. And so, as long as your content's actually, you actually have something to say, then it's definitely worth all 10 of those Twitter posts.
Or the image book, where you have an entire, 1,000-word essay and you just have the link to the image.
I have been so tempted to do that sometimes, but I just feel like that's a bit of a, I don't know. It feels like it defeats the purpose of using Twitter at that point. I mean, I understand that sometimes you do have to find ways around it, but I also know that Twitter crops images weird. And, I also know it compresses stuff. So it's a lot easier just to, part one, part two it instead of trying to go with the image.
Awesome. Well, you have a good day, Mike, and look forward to seeing you around.
You too. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
You bet. Bye-bye.